Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this 13th video in a series of videos looking at the Bhagavad Gita. We're looking at chapter 16, the first three verses, that's 1, 2, and 3. As I say at the beginning of each of these videos, please take a look at the first in the list here on YouTube. That's the introduction. It gives you kind of a bit of a background and what this is all about and why I'm doing these videos. And so take a look at that first. And the other suggestion would be, since I am reading these through in order and the videos are named the V1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I mean, that's the order in which these are read from the verses here. You can certainly skip around. These are not the most fast-paced videos. There's nothing exciting. There's no special effects. It's just, as it says in the intro, reflections on the words of the Gita here. And if you have looked at any of these videos before, you know that we always take a moment at the beginning to start from rest. It's a nice way of breaking the activities, breaking this constant, as I call it, the engine in the red zone that we tend to operate at this point in civilization. It's multitasked, it's just needs time to take a little bit of a break. I mean, you can finally get to sleep and in exhaustion, but to have that not be the case all the time, a little bit of break or a little bit of rest before activities is useful. And as I have mentioned in the other videos, this particular exercise comes from the School of Practical Philosophy, but certainly these days there are any number of organizations that will offer a similar practice. So with that said, let's just take a moment and come to rest. There's nothing to do, nowhere to go. Good. And as I have said before on these videos, certainly it wouldn't hurt to pause them, the video itself, and take whatever time you need to come to some form of rest for yourself. Now, we are looking at the second verse, which started with ahimsa, harmlessness, and we ended up with two videos for that. And in reading some other material in between, the two videos for ahimsa, harmlessness, were done together, but generally I get to these as I can get to them, line them up, and then put them out on YouTube. I think I've got a Sunday and Wednesday schedule, so you know that there's some break in between them, and of course I'm reading other things and doing other things, and we got to we get to the second word, which is satyam, truth. And one of the thoughts that I had, this is going to see where this goes, because like some of the other words that I mentioned that are either very emotionally charged or mentally idea charged, truth is certainly one of those words. If you were to say nowadays, you know, what is truth? Most people, I believe, just as my experience, and I hope that I am unique in this, and it's not the case, but most people will say, well, there is no such thing as truth, or as I've said before, we're in the kind of relative society. Everything's open to interpretation. I've mentioned before, who's to say what's right and what's wrong? Very common saying. Well, that's just your opinion. And if I were, you know, to pick the age, you know, some people talk about the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Age of Enlightenment. This is the age of everything's relative, or as we sometimes got in our corporate training classes, everything's negotiable. That's another phrase. And so sitting here reading through these and coming across Satyam, which we, by the way, have heard a form of that word before, coming up with something where the definition is truth itself, presents to me a major problem in presenting such a video, because that of what at least appears to me the widespread belief that there is no solid ground to stand on, that everything is in fact shifting sands, a matter of opinion. What was the other phrase? One man's terrorist is another freedom fighter. I think you could probably go out on the internet right now and find easily 100 phrases, 100 arguments in favor of it's all relative, and as we say, you know, who are you to tell me what to do? Who are you to say what's right and wrong? Of course, the first thing that I always say is, well, who are you to say what you're saying? Because if you answer that question, you can answer the other one. But the fact of the matter is, we operate from where we are, and if we are not acknowledging the truth of our own being and of the being in everyone that we see, yes, then we end up with this kind of relative, it all, you know, who can say, it's all wishy-washy, it's all, there must be another word. I'm kind of getting this kind of snaky, slithery type thing that goes on there, where it's just, you know, always a little off center. And the funny thing is, of course, we recognize this, and we talked about it in the first reading where we actually had Sattva. This is Satyam. And how about, we started off a little different on this one. How about let's go to the dictionary definitions first and see what we get from that. So Satyam, truth, is from Satya, and the definition given in the Monet-Williams dictionary, which is a standard Sanskrit dictionary. I don't know if another one was ever done up, but the definition we find there is true, real, actual, genuine, sincere, honest, truthful, faithful, pure, virtuous, good, successful, effectual, valid, and the uppermost of the 7 lokas or worlds. But we'll leave that one out for now. I think that just in what we've read, we get the sense of it. Now, if you've been following along with these, you know that each of these words has some form of root, and the root, there's a root and the root of a root. So let's start with the immediate root, which is sat, which is also the same root of sattva, which we talked about. That was true essence together with purity of being. Here we are back at sat, and some of this will be a repeat from the video, but sat as a root is being, existing, occurring, happening, being present, lasting, enduring, real, actual, beautiful, wise, venerable, and honest. And when I right before I do these, I read through once again just to let the ideas come up. And it's not that I'm trying to discourage anybody from watching these. I think that'll happen by itself anyway. But I always kind of want to, you know, put these sign up right away that says, you know, if the words beautiful, wise, venerable, and honest, if they do not attract you, you really shouldn't be watching this video. I am not here to convert anybody, tell anybody what to do, say that this is right or wrong. These are merely reflections on these words. However, one of the things that happens, and again, we don't stay with the Sanskrit, we go straight to English here. If beautiful, wise, venerable, and honest is not evoking something in your heart as a yeah, of course. Oh man, yeah, I've forgotten, but that's right. That if that doesn't kind of resonate with you, really, you're wasting your time. The only other thing I can suggest is you leave the video on, because I found that since these aren't a Star Wars spectacular of lightsabers and all sorts of special effects and what have you, it actually isn't bad as a method of falling asleep. So you don't need that classical music or the harp music. You can actually kind of doze off with these. Not a great way of promoting the video, but it's helpful nevertheless. So I've made a little bit light of it, but in actuality, the connection that we're talking about here, and really the sat, more than truth, is pointing back to being. And as I was saying before, I read other books and look at other things in between. One particular book that I was reading is called The Teachers of One by Paula Marvelly, I believe is that, and she's interviewed a number of teachers, almost with the intent of trying to find out what is truth. And one of the gentlemen there who she was interviewing was basically kept pointing back to being, that when you are naturally resting in your own being, that is closer to the truth, both of what you are and of where truthful action can spring from. And that may be a different way of looking at this. When I come in here and read off these things and you hear truth, and the reason I say it's charged is it really has this idea of set in concrete. There is the truth, you don't deviate from it, and anybody who does, depending upon which religion, is either shunned or should be killed or something like that. That I do not get from this, nor have I gotten that from any other readings where people genuinely interested in what does truth mean. So it does leave the question, if it is not this concrete block that's kind of, if not this set in stone, thou shalt, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the Ten Commandments. I think they are rather useful, but the purpose of law is to write down, to put out what it is that we have forgotten. So if one comes across thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, and the other list that's in there, it's only because naturally, with truth in our being operating from that, you wouldn't naturally be out stealing people's property, robbing, stealing, and killing them in case they put up some resistance to that. That wouldn't be the natural state of a human being. That said, and I kind of want to bring this up now because the Bhagavad Gita is a portion of the Mahabharata, which is a rather lengthy epic tale of India. And although I'm at chapter 16, if you were to read the whole of the Gita, you would quickly discover that what Krishna is imparting to Arjuna is everything necessary for him to fight this great battle that they're all aligned up in the middle of. And again, I'm not going to describe the story, just go out to the internet and get the summary of it. And on the one hand, we're talking about not bringing harm to people, and yet somebody could come back and say, yeah, well, look at the Gita. The whole Gita is about urging somebody to fight and basically kill off all the enemies. So that's why I say that, and boy, does this stuff get tricky, that it is not what is set in concrete. It's about what is necessary coming from our being. Yeah, it's a tricky thing because one can easily see how that slips back into that relative age that we're in. Well, if somebody could say don't kill and yet you're off to war, where is truth in that? And it's not at that level. The actions that we need to perform are the actions that we need to perform. What we're pointing to here is much more a state of being. And we've seen that in just about everything that we've looked at so far in here, that we're really dealing with state of being, purity of heart, which we did 2 whole videos, and as I said, could probably do a few more. Well, kind of here is somewhat more of that. When we meet a person, and this is, I'm calling this operating, and this is why I keep trying to make the difference between things set in concrete and operating. Which would you rather have? Somebody who's got a big rule book and consults rule book and says, nope, it says you can't do that. Or somebody who is able to act from truth because it's their being is free and clear and pure, as we've talked about, and is able to, if you will, perform the action necessary in that moment. I just, in hearing this, would rather have the person who's not hidebound, book-bound, set in concrete, unable to let anything in. I don't need that. I happen to, going to take a little diversion here. I happen to now reside in an area where a lot of Amish people are. And before COVID-19, when restaurants were, packed, what have you there, it's not unusual for Amish or Mennonites to socialize certain places. And, one particular restaurant, there would always be this gaggle of thin old ladies dressed in pure black, looking, see that face? And I would say, that is not a great advertisement for the joy of Christianity, if you want to call it. But I bet you, and this is kind of why I think it's funny that they're still out there with the horse and wagons. It's a following of the rules, and it doesn't appeal. And the reason it doesn't appeal is, in reflection on this, I think what we're pointing to is a person acting from a truthful being, from a genuine, a sincere, an honest place, pure, virtuous, good, effectual, okay? I'm going to put my money on that as a better way of dealing with things. Now, the other example we have of that, and again, we're reading from the Gita, that I jump back to Christianity and the Bible, but Jesus spent a lot of time upbraiding the if you will, the rabbis, the Pharisees, everybody in charge. Why? Because it was, again, hidebound, rule-bound, the whole thing about whether it's lawful to heal on the Sabbath. All of this is the rules of truth with what does it mean to live truth. And again, I leave it to you. You can get any version of the New Testament you want online. But if you just look at this back and forth of truth, I don't believe, from reflection here, that we are talking about truth as a set of rules that was set in place that must be followed. And certainly the events of 2020 should make it clear to people that, the rules that we had may not work here. And take a look, come from your being and see what could be done that is wise, that is honest, and that's beautiful. And beauty is not listed as one of the godly qualities here, but we get a sense of what a beautiful act could be when, I know you turn on the news and there's all the junky stuff that's going on, but almost all news programs end with the kind of the local or who's helping or the wonderful events. And that, somebody says, wasn't that a beautiful thing? People would generally say yes. So I'm going to take a breath here and say, okay, that's something of what is being pointed to by truth. And where do we go from here? I'm not really sure, because in one way it is such a large subject and we are so used to thinking of truth in certain ways, and the way we tend to think of it is very concrete, as I said, and with an element which I don't see in here, but with an element with an element of right and wrong to it, which of course then again gets you back to the relative world. Who's to say what's right and what's wrong? The same act at different times for different reasons may be appropriate. And right and wrong is a very slippery slope to go down. I think staying with truth, staying with what's coming out of your being and is honest and truthful and pure is a much better measure. Now, this requires a bit of wakefulness on the part of you and I, because as we've been mentioning, whatever you can't stop what comes out of your being. I mean, you're you. If I were to say to you, well, you don't exist, you'd go, well, of course I exist. Here I am, and what have you. I mean, so you can't not be you. You can't not be your being. Here you are a being, but you're getting anything that finally makes it out has been filtered through your heart and your mind. And so one of the reasons probably why purity of being was up ahead was you need kind of a clear path. And so if left to its own devices, your pure being were to act in whatever the situation is, it would probably be everything that we've just read here. The difficulty and the reason why people are so believing in that it's all relative is that every one of us, and I always raise my hand, myself included, is got our stuff. And as I said before, even though I am working off the, if you will, standard definitions, anything I say here is still being filtered through me. Hopefully it's less filtered as we kind of take these as the Spirit moves me, as it were. Hopefully there's less filter there. But the fact of the matter is we can't help it. Until the brush is cleared out, you're getting these words plus my stuff. And that's true for everybody and everything. So one of the suggestions why purity of being, purity of heart is there is to kind of let the truth, to let the natural actions of the situation come forth. And I think that in times, people talk about actions that happen, let's say, after a car accident, and they'll interview the person afterwards and go, well, I just did what I had to do. I think the way that we might approach life that could be easier is, why wait till some traumatic event to clear the path and let pure action come out? Why not live that way throughout life? And of course that would take a little bit of effort, or that's one way of not constantly joining what's coming through you to all of the stuff in your heart and your mind. It would take a little bit of effort to let that out. And I happen to think it's a useful effort. It would be wonderful, as I said way back in some of the earlier videos when we were talking about purity of being, to know that your fellow human being, the person who you are dealing with, is in fact acting from truth, or as near as the truth is possible. Not a definition of truth, but actually acting in the moment. And again, we need to have the burning building, people rush in and save people, car accident, pulling somebody out of a burning car. Yes, that's wonderful that happens, but it would be even more wonderful and useful if that happened in our day-to-day existence. So talking about truth here, there's a bunch of things bubbling in the mind right now, so I'm going to get us to our break time, because I'd like to see where the best way to pick this up is. So with that, at the 25-minute mark here, let's just take a break. I, of course, put this on pause and reflect a bit more on this. For you, I think I put about a 5-second part 1, part 2 in between. But let's just take our break, and we'll be back for part 2 in a moment. Well, welcome back to part 2 of this video. We are looking at the word satyam, which is loosely translated as truth. And we spent time in the first part of this video looking at truth and truthfulness. And in reflecting upon what was said and how to get this out of the relative way that we tend to look at everything right now, where there is no such thing as truth, which generally also translates the same as there's nothing good or bad. That's all relative. What's good for you might be bad for me, so on down the line. What came to mind, what might be a better way of looking at this, is to flip it around and take a look at the opposite side. I mean, if we can't exactly pinpoint what truthfulness means, because there's a bit around it here, let's look at certainly something that's common, has happened to everyone. Let's look at the opposite of truth, which we'll call lying right now. In fact, the opposite of truth is untruth. And then there's just plain out lying. Now, for most people, they're not making that distinction. And we'll see if we can clear that up as we go along. But the question that came to mind during this is, do you know when people are lying to you? How can you tell? And keeping in the theme that seems to be developing here, how does that affect you? How do you feel about people either outright lying to you or subtly lying to you and not telling the truth in any way, shape, or form? Now, the first outright lying is, I can hold up this piece of paper. This is Satyam that we're working on, and I could tell you, the listener, well, this is printed on green paper. And you would clearly say, it's not true. It is printed on white paper. And as I said, you'd say, well, that's not true. Or if you thought that there was some form of, if you will, malice or ill intent, you would say you're lying. And you don't normally say that to people. You're gentler. You might start off in saying, well, you're mistaken, or take a look again, or maybe you were thinking of something else. And anything where it is not with intent to deceive, we may not call that lying, but we're certainly not going to call it the truth of the matter, because again, when I hold up this piece of paper, it's pretty obvious it's printed on white paper. And these sort of things happen, and I don't think that they're what we're speaking of here. The difficulty, and what we run into a lot more, is when there is a hiding, a subtle deception, Or worse yet, and we'll get to that, people who have spent so much time lying that they become incapable of telling the truth in any way, shape, or form. Now, the question arises, why are people lying to you, or why are you lying to other people? There are certainly times when the truth may need to be hidden. I'm thinking of something like wartime, where you're sending spies in, thinking World War II, to be behind enemy lines, and that's necessary for your side to win the war. And if somebody were to ask you, are you here as a spy, you would say no. Most of us are not called upon for that type of deception in our day-to-day affairs. We may have something, I told you I've done many years of corporate America. You may have something called an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement between your company and another company, so that you are not letting out trade secrets. The assumption is, one, that you're going to honor this agreement, you'll be truthful about that, but that two, you won't be giving away to the competition an unfair advantage. So this is why I keep saying that there's shades around it, and it's a very difficult thing, because if I were to come by here and just say, well, truth is truth and that's all there is to it, unfortunately Christianity suffers a lot from this. If Jesus said it, if you don't believe Jesus, too bad, you're going to hell. That is not the kind of truth that I'm talking about. That is a severe misinterpretation of what you're reading. What we're talking about here is the difference between coming from truth and coming from untruth. And that's going to make a difference in what comes out and how you interact with people. And again, we could go down a really long list and say these are situations where hiding the truth, or unfortunately sometimes outright lie, is necessary. It may be necessary to preserve somebody's life. It may be necessary to get yourself out of a tense situation. Again, most of us don't have this experience in our day-to-day life, so it kind of begs the question again, what is this tendency towards lying? And unfortunately, as with some of the other qualities we've talked about, the people who are the recipients of this untruth are many times as I said, our loved ones, the ones close to us. For whatever reason, we don't want to share something. We don't want to say what's really happening. Again, I'm not talking about at holiday time, Christmas time, where we hide the gifts and we don't say anything about it. It seems to come down, as I'm thinking about this and reflecting on it, it seems to come down to a matter of intent. Are you intending to deceive the person in front of you? And we, of course, come to, how do I feel about being in the position of being deceived by, whether it's my spouse or children, co-workers, somebody who I'm entrusting. I always go back to the buying a car example, because that's somewhat of a classic, that people goes, I got to go in there. I literally cannot believe anything that the salesperson is going to say to me. They do that whole manager thing. I mean, we're well aware of how we feel when we are being deceived, when we are not being told the truth. And I come back again to, so what's the problem? Why are people not willing to say, hey, I can help those around me by practicing speaking the truth, and certainly not lying? I mean, again, I hope that this distinction is good. Lying I put down to outright intent to deceive. You know what the truth of the matter is. You're telling the person something for whatever your reasons are. The truth, speaking the truth, is more a matter of speaking what you're hearing. And I just happened to have looked over the video about worship, and there's a lot there about hearing and what runs in your mind. And certainly speaking the truth, whatever you're saying, whatever's happening, is coming out in the moment. It's whatever you're facing at the moment, whether it's a long line at the supermarket, salesperson at a car a dealership, whatever that is, if you will, the truth of what's right in front of you. The difficulty that we run into is that the situation, before you react to it, goes through your heart and it goes through your mind before finally coming out as words. And the severe difficulty there for those around us is we have all sorts of stuff floating around in our heart, and as 10 times as much stuff floating around in our mind, and the situation at hand is filtered on the way out through all those things. And you get, even with the best of intentions, what might be considered a proper response, a truthful response, comes out a little bit skewed because it's going through all of our stuff, as it were. So truth, being present, being connected, real, genuine, sincere, honest, faithful, pure, good. These are words not to, I think we've kind of covered the sentence. This is not to say you're setting this in stone. It is like a lot of what we've looked at. It is directional. It is letting everything flow naturally without your interference, and it is certainly not deliberately, which is the distinction I'll make about lying. It is not deliberately interfering with the flow of what's happening. I think we did the examples of people rushing into burning buildings or saving everybody from a car accident. In those moments, there's not, they say, well, I didn't have time to think about it. Yeah, and the benefit of that is you didn't have time to think about it, and it didn't have to go through your thought and heart stuff, okay? And that gives you an idea of the direction we're going in. And as I always say, wow, wouldn't that be wonderful if people were acting out of the moment and not acting out of their stuff? Just think about going to any affair where your relatives are there or friends, and you're going to go, oh, is Joe going to be there? And your spouse says, yeah, Joe's going to, and because everybody's stuff, mine included, is out on parade, is out on display. And the truthfulness that we're talking about here is less and less of your stuff, more and more of the creation as a whole, more of the truth of what's actually happening. Again, just because of my background, I always jump back to Christianity. Certainly one of the sayings, he who would save his life will lose it. You've got this idea of just lose it now. Just get rid of it. Get rid of your stuff and be done with it. And then the place that you're operating from, you don't have to, and I think this is another thing too, you don't have to do good. You don't have to be good. You don't have to try to be genuine. All of these things, and I think that may be a little difficulty with the word truth, maybe brings up some idea of Sunday school or the school mom or somebody who is kind of checking off the boxes. Well, did he do a good deed today? Is he sincere and honest and all of these things? It's a lot of pressure. What I would see is, don't worry about it. If you are in fact acting from the moment, if you are acting from love, from care, from compassion, pretty sure you're going to get these as the byproduct. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all this will be added unto you. You have this idea of, if you start at the right place and don't go through your stuff, you would end up at a sincere, honest, truthful action. So that, I hope, is a little bit helpful in... it's not going to do away with this idea that everything is relative, that who's to say and what's, who are you to say and all that sort of stuff. But as I say many times in these series here, we're looking at an alternative to the sounds that are out there now, at a possible way of acting different than what we normally do. And of course, none of this will mean anything unless it's seen to have some value. But I would say what I'm here for right now, from reading this and some of the other things, is to give it a fighting chance, so that it is not a day-to-day bombardment of, it doesn't matter, it's all relative, don't even try to be good or sincere or stuff, because what's that going to get you? It's really a miserable sound. I got to say, as I repeat these things and listen to them, it's like, boy, oh boy, you might as well just crawl into the trash dumpster if you're going to keep looking at it that way. But again, this is just what I get out of it. I still am always left with the question, why wouldn't you be truthful? Why wouldn't you be real and actual? It would probably make the lives of those around you a whole lot better. And certainly as a way of proceeding in life, just from my own experience, it's just way easier. It's just way easier. See what's in front of you, forget all your thoughts about it, and act from that. I think that would be much appreciated. So that's about it on truth. This one I don't think is going to get extra video, despite the fact that here we are, we're finding around, truth with a capital T, as it were. I think what comes out of it is you really can't talk a lot about it. You have to live it. And so my yapping on for another video or two about truth and its importance, I don't think is going to add to it. I've said this probably in a few of the videos already. It's like a performance at Carnegie Hall. You've practiced and practiced and practiced, but ultimately when you get up there on the stage, the practice time is over. You play from what you know, you play from what you've learned, you play for the benefit of the audience that's out there. And truth certainly seems to fall into that category. We could spend years arguing about it, or we could, like that, and then live it, and then you're free. The truth will make you free. Well, I'll vouch for that. You're free. You're free of your stuff. You've lost your life, and you've gained a very, very useful to the creation way of operating. So snap out of it, okay? Stop lying. As we say, shouldn't have to say these things, but just live it. And forget about what your thoughts are about it. You're the only one who cares about your thoughts, and trust me, again, ask those around you how much they remember of anything that you've said to them. And that goes back to what we talked about before. Are you listening to what you're saying? So there we are. I promise not to talk too much more about the truth here. Just let it be. Let it go. So that's 2 song titles so far. And again, just as we're coming up with our sign-off here, if you don't like this, if none of this appeals to you, there's plenty of cat videos out on the internet to look at. They're very funny, they're cute. So until next time,